the Arizona territory of 1874 breathed dust and secrets. Sun-baked mesas cast long, skeletal shadows across canyons that had witnessed centuries of life and death, now merely echoes of forgotten skirmishes. A dry wind, laden with the scent of sagebrush and the ghosts of forgotten tribes, whispered through the crags. This was a land not easily tamed, and its wild heart beat strongest in the man who roamed its most desolate reaches. Taza, a name once spoken with reverence and fear among Apache and settler alike, now lived his days in the canyon of regret. His mid-30s sat heavy on him, etched in the perpetual stoicism of his gaze and the quiet economy of his movements. His broad shoulders, once bearing the weight of a war band, now carried the heavier burden of exile. He was a warrior, a leader who had dared to defy the elders in a futile bid for peace, and for that he was cast out. His homeland, the very earth beneath his worn moccasins, was now a prison of solitude. He moved through the rugged landscape as if he were part of it, a shadow among shadows, his senses finely tuned to the rustle of a lizard, the distant cry of a hawk, the subtle shift in the air that promised either rain or trouble. There was no peace for Taza, only the stark reality of survival and the endless echo of what was lost. Every sunrise was a reminder of battles fought, brothers mourned, and a people slowly suffocating under the relentless westward expansion. Miles away, cloaked in a deceptive veneer of stability, lay Mercy Ridge, a raw, unkempt town carved out of the wilderness by the sweat and ambition of settlers and former soldiers. It was a place of boom and bust, of dusty saloons and hastily erected churches, a simmering cauldron of ambition and resentment. The very air there crackled with the unspoken tension between those who claimed the land by right of purchase and those who had called it home for generations. The railroad pushed ever closer, a metal serpent promising prosperity, but delivering only further encroachment. Cattle barons eyed vast tracts of tribal hunting grounds, their hunger insatiable. Taza watched it all from afar, a silent sentinel to the slow, inevitable creep of change. He saw the smoke from their fires, heard the distant thud of their hammers, and felt the tremors of their wagons rumbling over the earth. He was a phantom, an uncomfortable memory for those who had once faced his ferocity. And then, one evening, as the sun bled deep oranges and purples into the western sky, a sound sliced through the quiet melancholy of the canyon. A cry, sharp and desperate, carried on the river's current. It was a human sound, out of place in the wild symphony of the desert. Taza's head snapped up, his senses suddenly alive, the warrior instinct long dormant, stirring within him like a banked fire. The river, the very heart of this unforgiving land, was calling to him. Taza moved swiftly, a silent predator drawn by the scent of distress. The cries had intensified, now mingled with the roar of the rapids. His bare feet found purchase on the slick, river-smooth stones as he descended towards the churning water. Just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the canyon rim, painting the western sky in hues of fiery amber and bruised violet, he saw her, a figure, small and flailing, caught in the relentless grip of the salt river. She was battered, her clothes torn, clinging to a submerged log as the current threatened to rip her away. Maria Langford. Taza recognized her even from a distance. Her father, Colonel Langford, was a prominent fixture of Mercy Ridge, his self-righteous posturing echoing even in Taza's isolated canyon. The girl was young, hardly more than a woman, her face pale with terror and the cold spray of the river. Without hesitation, Taza plunged into the tumultuous water. The salt river, though life-giving, was also a formidable foe, its currents powerful enough to snap bones and drag the unwary to its depths. But Taza knew this river as intimately as he knew the lines on his own hand. He battled the surge, his powerful strokes cutting through the froth, his focus solely on the struggling form ahead. He reached her just as her grip faltered, her fingers slipping from the slick bark of the log. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, met his for a fleeting moment before she succumbed to the river's pull. Taza seized her arm, his grip like iron, and began the arduous fight back to shore. He felt the cold shock of the water, the bruising impact of hidden rocks, but the drive to save a life, any life, propelled him forward. It was an instinct older than his exile, deeper than his bitterness. He dragged her, half-conscious and shivering, onto a narrow strip of sandy bank. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps, her soaked dress clinging to her slender form. Maria was alive, but barely. Taza's trained eye quickly assessed her injuries: a badly scraped arm, a deep gash on her forehead, and a profound exhaustion that threatened to pull her back into unconsciousness. He built a small, smokeless fire from hidden tinder, its warmth quickly warding off the chill that had settled deep in Maria's bones. He cleaned her wounds with water and a poultice of river herbs, his touch surprisingly gentle for a warrior hardened by years of conflict. She watched him with wary, bewildered eyes, clutching her side. Maria rasped, her voice hoarse. Taza did not answer immediately. He merely continued his work, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. He presented her with a small, sun-dried piece of jerky, sustenance he rarely shared. Maria's gaze, though still clouded by fear and pain, held a flicker of something else: curiosity, perhaps even defiance. She didn't know it, but she was a hunted woman, not just by the faceless outlaws who had attacked her stagecoach, but by her own father's men. Colonel Langford, with his Iron Order, a quasi-military group funded by railroad and cattle barons greedy for land, had set a snare. Maria had stumbled upon evidence of his insidious plan: a staged Apache attack to justify a brutal campaign of land seizures across the territory. And Taza, the exiled Apache warrior, had unknowingly pulled her from one kind of danger, only to find himself entangled in another, far more insidious war. Maria awoke to the crisp morning air, the small fire reduced to glowing embers. Taza was gone from her side, a phantom of the wilderness. Then she saw him, a still, powerful silhouette against the rising sun, standing on a high promontory overlooking the vast, wild expanse. Beside him stood a horse, ancient and wise, with one eye clouded, yet radiating an almost mythical presence. 3 Toes, the legendary war pony of Taza, a beast so fierce and loyal, many believed it was merely whispers carried on the wind. Taza's face, usually a mask of stoicism, held a distant sorrow. Maria, despite her pain and fear, felt a pull towards understanding this enigmatic man who had saved her life. She asked, her voice tentative. Taza turned, his gaze unblinking. "I am Taza," he stated, his voice a low rumble, the words precise, unburdened by unnecessary inflection. He offered no more, but his eyes, deep and knowing, hinted at volumes Maria could not yet comprehend. As they began their perilous journey deeper into the canyons, avoiding the main trails that would lead them to Mercy Ridge, Maria began to understand Taza's world. Every rock, every twisted mesquite, every whisper of wind held significance for him. He moved with a grace born of innate knowledge, a master of this harsh domain. But beneath the surface of his quiet competence, shadows flickered. A sudden flock of crows rising from a distant ridge would make him pause, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his hip. The distant echo of a gunshot would momentarily cloud his eyes with an old pain. Maria noticed these things. She saw the wariness, the phantom flickers of battle in his posture, and the deep-seated sadness that occasionally softened the hard line of his jaw. One afternoon, seeking shelter from the fierce sun, they rested by a hidden spring. The water, cold and clear, seemed to calm the air. Maria, emboldened by their shared vulnerability, spoke. "Why are you out here alone?" Taza picked up a smooth river stone, turning it over and over in his calloused fingers. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost a sigh of wind through dry grass. "My people, they chose a different path. A crooked path, I thought." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in a memory. "There was a battle, the last one for my brother. He was young, His voice tightened, a rare crack in his stony facade. I could not. I failed him. I failed my people. After that, I walked away. They called it exile. Maria felt a pang of unexpected empathy. She imagined the weight of such a failure, the burden of a brother's death. Their journey became a dance of evasion. Taza, ever watchful, detected riders long before they saw them. They were pursued, first by shadowy figures Taza identified as bounty riders, then by elements of Colonel Langford's militia. It seemed Maria's disappearance had raised more alarm than a simple runaway. The very land became their ally, and their enemy, a maze of jagged cliffs for escape, but also home to venomous creatures and the sudden, terrifying wrath of flash floods that could sweep a canyon clean in moments. Maria, though fragile in body, possessed a will of iron. She was educated, a reader of books, and a keeper of ledgers, but her defiance was not passive. She questioned Taza, challenged his quiet bitterness, poking at the scars she sensed beneath his stoicism. She talked of justice, of right and wrong, of what could be, not just what was. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between evasion and survival, Taza found himself listening, truly listening, and a faint, almost forgotten reflection sparked within him. A memory of peace, of life, and perhaps of something akin to hope. The pursuit was relentless, a gnawing presence that clung to their heels like a hungry wolf. Taza and Maria, moving through the treacherous terrain, became a single, desperate entity. Days blurred into a continuous struggle against not just their pursuers, but the unforgiving desert itself. One sweltering afternoon, while navigating a narrow, dust-choked canyon, the air suddenly grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Taza froze, his hand snapping up, signaling Maria to halt. A moment later, the whiz of a bullet split the air, embedding itself in the rock face just inches from Maria's head. Ambush. 3 riders, grim and determined, emerged from the shadows of the canyon walls. They were not soldiers, but rough-hewn men, their eyes alight with the cold fire of a bounty. Maria recognized one of them, a notorious tracker known for his mercilessness, often seen in the employ of her father. One of them bellowed, his voice echoing menacingly. Taza pushed Maria behind the meager cover of a fallen boulder. 3 toes, until now a silent, stoic companion, let out a piercing whinny, a challenge that reverberated through the canyon. The blind eye of the ancient pony seemed to gleam with a fierce light, an uncanny reflection of the warrior spirit it embodied. The ensuing skirmish was swift and brutal. Taza moved with a fluid, deadly grace, a blur of motion. His traditional weapons, a long knife, a short bow, became extensions of his will. He felled one rider with an arrow, then closed the distance with a speed that left the remaining 2 stunned. His blade flashed, a controlled chaos that spoke of years of desperate warfare. The fight ended as quickly as it began, leaving 2 attackers vanquished and the last one fleeing in terror. Taza stood over the fallen, his breathing heavy, his face grim. Maria watched, her breath caught in her throat, witnessing a savagery born of necessity, a ferocity that both awed and terrified her. "They seek you, girl," Taza stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Maria, still trembling, nodded. "My father. He wants me silenced." She spoke of her fear, of the papers she'd found, of Colonel Langford's insidious scheme to provoke an Apache uprising to seize ancestral lands. The truth of her father's betrayal hung heavy in the air between them, solidifying the danger they faced. Their journey became even more desperate. Taza guided them through hidden paths, through valleys rumored to be infested with rattlesnakes, their incessant rattling a constant, unnerving chorus. Days later, heavy monsoon clouds gathered overhead, bringing with them the terrifying promise of flash floods. Taza, his experience honed by countless seasons, navigated them through the rising waters, pushing them to higher ground, the roar of the deluge a deafening reminder of the land's raw power. Yet, despite the omnipresent threat, a strange dynamic began to form between them. Maria, intelligent and perceptive, found herself challenging Taza's hardened exterior. She questioned his bitterness, his quiet solitude. She asked one evening, as they huddled under a rock overhang, the rain drumming a steady rhythm. Taza, for the first time, did not simply dismiss her words. He looked at her, truly looked, and in her defiant eyes, he saw a flicker of that passionate hope he had long since extinguished within himself. Her words, not accusatory, but born of genuine concern, pricked at the armor around his heart. He saw the resilience in her fight for truth and justice, even against her own kin. And in that quiet observation, a quiet reflection began to stir within him of what could have been, what perhaps still could be, of a life not defined by loss, but by protection, by finding a way to make a difference again. The entrance was almost invisible, a narrow slit in the sheer rock face, hidden by a cascading veil of vines and moss. Taza led Maria into its cool, echoing depths, a sanctuary from the relentless sun and the relentless pursuit. The air inside was still and dry, carrying the ancient scent of dust and flint. Paintings adorned the walls, stylized figures of deer and men, vibrant ochre and charcoal against the dark stone. This was a place of power, a tribal cave used for ceremonies and shelter for generations. Maria, her gaze sweeping across the artistry of a forgotten time, moved deeper into the cavern. Her hand brushed against a small, concealed alcove, and she felt something hard, brittle, and oddly shaped. She pulled it out. It was a shield, or what remained of one. Burnt, its rawhide stretched and cracked, the vibrant paints of its original design reduced to a charred smear, but its circular form was unmistakable. Taza, who had been tending their small fire, stiffened. He turned slowly, his eyes fixing on the object in Maria's hands. A flicker of raw pain crossed his face, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Maria asked, sensing its profound significance. Taza took the shield from her, his fingers tracing the burnt edges with a profound sorrow. "My brothers," he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with memory. His spirit. It was painted here. He sat heavily on the cave floor, the burnt shield resting on his knees. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken grief. Maria waited, sensing that a dam was about to break. "He was called Young Eagle," Taza began, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking to the spirits etched on the cave walls. "He was brave. Too brave, perhaps." Taza's eyes were distant, seeing not the cave, but the horrifying tableau of the past. "We were to draw them away, create an opening for our women and children to flee. He was at my side, eager for his first true war count, but their fire was too great." A tremor ran through Taza's muscular frame. I tried to reach him, to pull him back, but the chaos, the screams, I saw him fall. I saw their horses ride over him, and I ran. I kept running, leading the cavalry away, fulfilling my duty. But I left him there, my brother. The words were an old, festering wound, torn open anew. That was the final battle, the one that broke me. I returned to my people, but I was not the same. They called me a warrior, but in my heart, I was a coward. I walked away from them all, from the fighting, from the negotiations that followed, where the elders talked peace while settlers stole our lands. His voice cracked, a sound of profound desolation. I became what I am now, nothing. Maria felt a profound wave of understanding wash over her. Not just pity, but a deep respect for the terrible burden he had carried. She realized his exile was as much self-imposed as it was decreed by his tribe. "My father," Maria said, her voice firm, pulling Taza back to the present. "He wants to make it look like the Apache have attacked, to give him reason to use his iron order to seize more land to protect the settlers. He has detailed plans, ledgers, and even a map hidden in an old church ledge back in Mercy Ridge. It shows where he is stockpiling stolen rifles, waiting to arm men he'll claim are Apache raiders." Taza looked at her, his eyes slowly losing their distant, haunted look, replaced by a grim resolve. Maria's revelation of her father's treachery provided a new, devastating context to his own failure. Not just a failed battle, but a deliberate, calculated eradication. This, Maria continued, holding out her hand to him, not for comfort, but a silent offer of purpose. This is not about revenge, Taza. It's about protecting the innocent, so they don't suffer the same fate as your brother. He looked at the burnt shield on his lap, then at Maria, her eyes shining with quiet determination. The weight of his past, the haunting images of his brother, still lingered. But Maria's words, her clarity of purpose, seemed to cut through the bitter fog of his regret. She had not asked him to fight for his people or for revenge. She asked him to fight for what was right, to protect those who could not protect themselves. It was the warrior code in its purest form. A spark ignited in Taza's eyes, a flame that had been dormant for too long. He slowly rose, the burnt shield still in his hand, its presence no longer a symbol of defeat, but a solemn vow. "We go to Mercy Ridge," he stated, his voice low but steady. "Not for peace, not for revenge, but to protect the innocent, as he had failed to do before." The decision made, a quiet resolution settled over Taza. The long ride to Mercy Ridge transformed from a weary escape into a determined advance. They moved with a newfound urgency, Taza's pace relentless, Maria matching him stride for stride. Beneath the vast, indifferent sky, a strange alliance had formed, bound by a shared sense of injustice and a dangerous quest for truth. Taza navigated the wilderness with unparalleled skill, leading them through hidden ravines and over silent ridges, always mindful of unseen eyes. Three Toes, the old war pony, seemed to sense the shift in Taza's spirit, carrying them with renewed vigor, its blind eye fixed on some unseen horizon. As they drew closer to the edge of the civilized world, the land itself seemed to grow taut, vibrating with the unspoken tension that permeated the Arizona territory. They reached the outskirts of Mercy Ridge as dusk settled, cloaking the crude frontier town in long, deceptive shadows. Taza paused on a high ridge overlooking the settlement, the glow of town lights a sickly yellow against the deepening twilight. The air hummed with the distant murmur of voices, the clatter of wagons, and a low, rhythmic sound that Taza recognized as live music from the town's saloon. A ceremonial peace dinner, Maria had warned him, where Langford planned to publicly unveil his efforts at reconciliation. A perfect stage for a final, twisted act. Maria, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance, pointed towards the old wooden church, its steeple a stark silhouette against the fading sky. "The map," she whispered. "It's in a loose stone on the ledge near the altar." Her voice was steady, her gaze fixed on the town that was both her home and the source of her deepest betrayal. "He intends to frame an Apache rider for an assassination during the dinner, Taza." Taza nodded, his eyes scanning the town, assessing avenues of entry, potential traps, and the positions of Langford's men. He knew this would be a ride into a lion's den, but for the first time in years, the fear was not for himself, but for the innocent people Maria spoke of. He thought of his brother, young Eagle, and the weight of failing to protect him. This was a chance to atone, to prevent another life from being needlessly extinguished. "We need to find Father Ewan," Maria stated, urgency in her voice. "He tried to mediate with the tribes before. He knows the truth of the tensions here." As they descended from the ridge, a figure emerged from the shadows of an ancient saguaro cactus. It was a man, lean and wiry, carrying a well-worn rifle and a pack. Elias Buck Roman. The trapper/gunrunner Taza had known from the old wars, a man whose loyalties had always been as shifty as the desert sands. Buck Roman's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with a flicker of recognition. "Taza," he grunted, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. "Thought you were a ghost these days. And the Langford girl?" Taza met his gaze squarely. "Justice," he said, his voice flat. "Langford plans to spill innocent blood. He uses your kind, Buck." Buck Roman scoffed, but a moment later, a shadow of genuine concern crossed his features. He was no warrior, but he understood the precarious balance of the frontier, and the potential for a full-blown war was bad for business and worse for survival. "Colonel Langford's getting bolder," he admitted, his gaze drifting towards the town. "Hires bounty hunters for everything these days." He spat on the ground. "An opportunity," he called it. Maria stepped forward. "He plans to stage an assassination, Buck. To blame the Apache for it. He has stockpiled weapons." Buck Roman's eyes widened, a dawning realization in their depths. The pieces clicked into place for him. "That son of a—" he snarled. For all his shifting loyalties, Buck Roman had a pragmatic sense of self-preservation. "All right, Taza," he said, grudgingly. "What do you need?" Taza looked at Maria, then at Buck. The pieces were falling into place. The final act was approaching. He gripped the burnt war shield that he still carried, its weight a reminder of everything he stood to lose and everything he fought to protect. The silence had ended. Mercy Ridge was abuzz. Lanterns cast a soft glow on the newly erected tables in the town square, laden with food and drink. Colonel Langford, resplendent in his uniform, moved among the crowd, his smile too wide, his promises too fervent. He was a snake oil salesman, charming the crowd while preparing to strike. His iron order, a menacing presence, stood watch, their eyes cold and alert. Taza and Maria, guided by Buck Roman, slipped into the town under the cover of the gathering dusk. Buck, true to his word, had quietly spread whispers, subtly planting seeds of doubt among the more observant townspeople. Taza moved like a shadow, making his way directly towards the festive gathering, 3 toes a silent, imposing specter at his side. Maria, meanwhile, headed for the church. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her resolve was unyielding. She knew what she had to do. Inside the dimly lit church, the silence was a stark contrast to the revelry outside. She found the loose stone on the altar ledge, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out the hidden map, a chilling blueprint of Langford's planned atrocities. Then, moving to the sacristy, she retrieved the ledgers, the damning evidence of her father's calculated betrayal. Just as Langford raised his glass to offer a toast, a single, piercing war cry ripped through the twilight. An Apache rider, silhouetted against the rising moon, galloped into the square, his bow drawn, an arrow nocked. The crowd erupted in terrified shouts. This was Langford's play, the staged assassination, meant to ignite the flames of fear and justification. But before the rider could loose his arrow, another figure emerged from the shadows surrounding the square. Taza, the very embodiment of the ghost Apache, stepped into the light. He held no weapon, his presence alone a thunderclap of defiance. 3 toes stood majestically behind him, its single knowing eye fixed on the colonel. Taza's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the clamor. Colonel Langford's face contorted in a mask of shock and rage. "Apache! How dare you!" he roared, drawing his pistol. His Iron Order men moved to flank him, their rifles raised. The Apache rider, now seeing Taza, hesitated, his staged attack momentarily disrupted. It was then Maria appeared, stepping into the square from the church, the ledgers and map clutched in her hands. Maria's voice rang with a clarity that silenced the crowd. "There will be no war." She began to read, her voice gaining strength with each damning word. Purchase of 500 obsolete Army rifles, delivery to Coyote Canyon, for training purposes, she recited from the ledger. The words hung in the air, cold and calculated, exposing the colonel's intricate, self-serving plot. She then held up the map, its details chillingly clear, revealing hidden caches of weapons intended to be found and attributed to the Apache. A murmuring swept through the townsfolk, a slow realization dawning on their faces. Father Ewan, who had watched from the periphery, his face pale with dread, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the damning evidence. Even Buck Roman, positioned on a nearby rooftop, let out a low whistle of grim satisfaction. Langford bellowed, his face purpling with fury. "She's a traitor." But before his men could move, a brutal crossfire erupted. Some townsfolk, galvanized by Maria's bravery and Buck's subtle instigation, refused to be complicit. Shots rang out, men fell, and the festive square turned into a chaotic battleground. Taza, now armed with a knife in each hand, moved through the fray, defending Maria, disarming Langford's men with precise, lethal grace. The staged Apache rider, seeing his mission exposed, faded back into the night. Through the unfolding chaos, Taza's eyes locked with Langford's. The colonel, seeing his plan unravel, made a desperate dash towards the graveyard beside the river, an escape route he knew well. Taza followed, Maria close behind him. The graveyard was a somber, silent arena. Under the cold, indifferent gaze of the moon and the river, Taza and Langford met. "You bring blood to the river, Langford," Taza hissed, his voice a low growl. Langford snarled, drawing a hidden knife. The duel was raw, personal, shorn of any pretense of honor. A desperate dance of steel and instinct. Taza, though wounded and weary from days of pursuit, moved with the primal ferocity of a cornered wolf. Langford fought with the desperate cunning of a man losing everything. Their blades met, scraped, and glinted in the moonlight. One decisive move, a swift, upward thrust of Taza's blade, and Langford staggered back, a gasp escaping his lips. He stumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief, and then fell, a dark silhouette, into the cold, forgiving current of the salt river, the very river that had once delivered his daughter from its grasp. The sound of gunshots faded in the distance. The battle in the square was ending, the remaining members of the Iron Order scattered or captured by the roused townsfolk. Taza stood, breathing heavily, watching the current carry Langford away. He felt a sharp, searing pain in his side, a stray bullet from the chaotic crossfire. He swayed, then looked at Maria, her face pale but resolute. Their mission was complete. Justice, raw and incomplete as it might be, had been delivered. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and pearl, a thick fog rolled in from the river, shrouding the graveyard in a mystical haze. Taza, weakened but defiant, turned and disappeared into the swirling mist, Three Toes a silent, steadfast companion beside him. The battle for Mercy Ridge culminated in the graveyard, a silent sentinel overlooking the Salt River. Blood stained the hallowed ground where lives had been taken and lives had been saved. Colonel Langford, his face a mask of primal fury, lunged at Taza with a desperate, snarling cry. The knife, drawn from his boot, glinted malevolently in the moonlight. Taza, his side already burning from the bullet wound sustained in the chaos of the square, met the attack with an almost weary precision. This was not war, not strategy. This was raw, personal vengeance meeting unyielding resolve. Steel grated against steel. Langford, driven by a lifetime of entitlement and arrogance, fought dirty, his movements fueled by a panicked desperation. Taza, honed by years of survival in a brutal land, moved with a fluid, economical grace, deferring the colonel's wild thrusts, waiting for his opening. The air grew heavy with the smell of iron and damp earth. Every parry, every lunge, was punctuated by ragged breaths and the soft thud of their boots on the graves. Langford, his eyes wide and wild, tried to bait Taza, hurling insults that bounced off the Apache's silent fury. Savage! Taza did not speak. His focus was absolute. He saw the opening, a momentary imbalance in Langford's stance, a consequence of his uncontrolled rage. With a sudden, swift movement, Taza evaded a thrust and, in a single, upward motion, drove his own blade forward. Langford gasped, a choked sound, his eyes widening in disbelief as he looked down at the hilt protruding from his chest. The fight drained from him, replaced by a profound, shuddering shock. He stumbled backward, arms flailing, a dark silhouette against the moonlit river. He fell a heavy, unceremonious splash into the churning current. The salt river, giver of life and taker of souls, received him. His body disappeared quickly downstream, swept away by the same unforgiving waters that had nearly claimed his daughter. The river had delivered Maria, and now it claimed her father. Taza stood over the spot where Langford had vanished, his chest heaving, the throbbing pain in his side a constant, stark reminder of his own mortality. He had fought not for revenge, but for justice, to protect the innocent from the machinations of a truly evil man. He looked towards Maria, who had made her way to the edge of the graveyard, her face streaked with tears and dirt, but her eyes alight with a fierce resolve. The town square was settling into a grim quiet, the sounds of battle replaced by the mournful cries of the wounded and the hushed whispers of the survivors. He had fulfilled his purpose, prevented an unnecessary war driven by greed and corruption. But Mercy Ridge was no longer a place for him. He was a phantom, an Apache ghost, connected by blood and memory to the land, but an outsider in the encroaching world of settlers. The bullet wound, though not fatal, was a debilitating ache, a sign that his body needed the solace of the wilderness and the wisdom of the old ways to heal. As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and pearl, a thick fog rolled in from the river, shrouding the graveyard in a mystical haze. Taza turned, his gaze meeting Maria's, one last time, a silent exchange of respect and gratitude. He melded with the swirling mist, 3 toes a silent, steadfast companion beside him. He was bleeding, but he was alive. He had saved Maria. He had exposed the truth. He had stopped a war. He had fulfilled his promise to himself, to the memory of young Eagle, and to the innocent. He disappeared into the fog, back into the wilderness, a warrior returning to the land he had bled for, his fate forever intertwined with the flow of the Salt River. In the aftermath of the Mercy Ridge confrontation, the dust slowly settled, but the town would never be the same. The exposure of Colonel Langford's treachery had ripped away the veneer of false stability, forcing the townsfolk to confront uncomfortable truths. The Iron Order, its corrupt foundation exposed by Maria's courage and Taza's intervention, crumbled. Some members fled, others were arrested, their reign of intimidation abruptly ended. Maria Langford, the daughter who had bravely condemned her own father, became a figure of both admiration and controversy. To some, she was a hero, a symbol of unwavering moral fortitude who had prevented a massacre. To others, especially those who had profited from Langford's schemes or lived in the comfortable ignorance of his reign, she was a traitor, an unnatural woman who had betrayed her own blood. Undeterred, Maria found her purpose. Using the very ledgers and documents that had incriminated her father, she tirelessly advocated for native protections across the territory. She became a voice for the voiceless, a bridge between 2 worlds that had long been at war, striving to ensure that no more innocent lives were sacrificed to greed and expansion. Her words, once dismissed as girlish defiance, now carried the weight of proven truth, slowly chipping away at the prejudice and misinformation that fueled the territorial conflicts. Mercy Ridge, once a powder keg, began a slow, arduous transformation. The initial shock gave way to quiet reflection. The memory of the staged attack, the reveal of Langford's villainy, and the unexpected intervention of Taza forced a reckoning. Over the years, it became a quieter place, its rough edges softened by a newfound collective understanding. It would never be utopia, but it evolved into a kind of sanctuary, a frontier town that, through its own painful crucible, learned to choose dialogue over destruction and peace over profit. The whisper of the river, once a tale of blood, began to carry stories of resilience. And what of Taza? The Apache ghost, as some called him, had vanished into the dawn fog. The bullet wound, though not fatal, had drained him, requiring the deep solitude and natural remedies of the wilderness he knew so intimately. He sought no accolades, no place in the new world Maria was striving to build. His redemption was not a public declaration, but a quiet, personal peace forged in the fires of righteous action. He had faced his demons, protected the innocent, and in doing so had honored the memory of his fallen brother. Occasionally, through the sun-drenched canyons and across the vast, silent mesas, Writers would speak of an old tale, of a sighting that defied logic. A lone figure, stoic and ageless, silhouetted against a crimson sunset on a high ridge. Beside him, a magnificent war pony, its head held high, one eye clouded by age, yet radiating an untamed spirit. The Apache and the blind-eyed horse, watching silently over the land they knew, the land they loved, the land for which Taza had bled. The stories would fade into legend, whispers carried on the wind, but the essence remained. For they say the river remembers all things, blood, truth, mercy, and somewhere beyond its bends, beyond the boundaries of maps and the reach of men, rides a warrior forgotten by time, but never by the land he bled for. His legacy was not written in history books, but etched into the quiet dignity of the land, a testament to the enduring spirit of courage, sacrifice, and the profound, transformative power of one man's redemption.